All right, well, thank you everyone for sharing. In case you missed it, my name is Emily Brown and want to just welcome everyone to our webinar today. We're so excited to have you join us for the unveiling of Giving USA on Tableau, which is a product that was made possible by our partnership with Salesforce. I'm the marketing director for Giving USA Foundation. And as I said, I'm in Virginia Beach, Virginia. If you're just joining us, go ahead and let us know in the chat where you're calling in from so we can just see where everyone's from today. Before we jump in, I do want to go over a few housekeeping notes. You'll notice that the session is being recorded, and we will send the recording out to all of our registrants in the coming days. Additionally, we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So as we go through, please use the question box to submit any questions that you might have. On the next slide, you'll see our agenda for today. Because we have such a broad audience, we're going to start with a quick overview of the Giving Institute and Giving USA Foundation and our most popular research product, which is the annual report on philanthropy and includes insights from the data that was released earlier this year for giving in the year 2020. Following that, our friends at Salesforce are going to dive into the Giving USA visualizations while also discussing the importance for nonprofits to implement real-time data-driven decision-making in their organizations. And we'll then have a presentation of the types of products and services Tableau provides to nonprofits, and of course, finish up with your questions. So now I'm going to introduce you to today's presenters. I'm excited to have with us today Keith Curtis, who is past chair of the Giving USA Foundation, as well as Nicole Adair and Sean Pfaff, who are with Salesforce.org and Tableau, respectively. And they're going to share their expertise on both of those organizations and companies and the services that they provide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Keith.
Thanks much, Emily, and welcome to everyone joining us from really all over the place. And we've got a great crowd today. And my role today is to give you a little bit of background on the Giving Institute, and we're going to talk a little bit about the numbers from last year. And I'll probably spend maybe 10 or 12 minutes doing that, but I'm really excited to get into the piece about this new platform through Salesforce and Tableau that will allow us to really dig into this data and also your data. So first, just a little bit of background on the Giving Institute. The Giving Institute was formed in 1935. There's about 55 to 60 members. It's essentially an association. It's fundraising consulting firms like the one I have, and it's also nonprofit service firms like data providers, software firms, well screening firms. Salesforce, for instance, is a member. So our role since 1935 has really been working on thought leadership in philanthropy, ethics in philanthropy. And 66 years ago, we created the Giving USA Foundation, which will end our annual report on philanthropy. And that's what I'll dig into now. So as we move along and look at this annual report on philanthropy for the year 2020, as I mentioned, it's the 66th year that we've done this. Keep in mind that with the Tableau feature, you'll be digging into the last 40 years, and we'll talk a little bit about that. It's the longest running, most comprehensive study of its kind, and we work with our partners at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy who help us with the research and writing of this. We also do other reports. And so I encourage you to look at our website. We've done reports on donor advised funds. We've done reports on planned giving, which is our most recent one, and also on senior giving. So there's lots of information there for you as you dig in. But what I'm going to do is spend the next few minutes talking a little bit about what happened in 2020 with giving, which will help you as you then figure out how you're going to use this new platform that we have. So as we look at what happened in giving in this next slide that we'll have here, giving reached a record, which for many people is a little surprising that it happened in the midst of a pandemic. You know, while we didn't have a whole lot to celebrate in 2020, we can celebrate the impact that philanthropy had and helping so many people and so many nonprofits. In 2020, over $471 billion was given. I mentioned it was a record year of giving. I should note that out of the last 7 years, 6 of those have been record years. So we continue to see the generosity that Americans have in place. Our giving environment was incredibly complex. We had a global pandemic. We had an economic recession caused by the pandemic. We had a recovery for some. We had an incredible response last year to racial, social justice movements. We had new legislation that helped individuals, businesses, and nonprofits. And so there was a lot going on within the charitable and philanthropic market. And by the year end, we ended up having a nice increase in the stock market. The S&P 500 grew 16.3%. And one of the things I would tell you is tracking the S&P 500 helps us really see how philanthropy is going to move. Americans are always generous, but when the market's doing well, they do well. The other thing I want to point about this slide before we move along is just look at this absolute amazing growth that we've seen in the last 40 years of giving. If you go back to the 1980s, in inflation adjusted dollars, about $152 billion was given, and we're now at $471 billion. So that's pretty amazing. As we look at on this slide, we see this is the more iconic pie chart that many of you all have probably seen about Giving USA and where the money goes, the 4 sources that we have. 3 of those 4 sources grew in giving. Just for the last 2 years, individual giving has dropped below 70%. It's now at 69%. But what I always like to remind people is that when they really think of individual giving, keep in mind that half of all of the foundation giving in this country comes from private family foundations. So if you take that number, add it to individuals, and you look at bequest, and what are bequests? But that's an individual making a gift at their death. What we know is about 86% of all giving in this country is tied to individual giving. Just as a quick piece of the 3 of the 4 sectors that were up were individuals, foundations, and bequests. Corporate giving was down last year. And we also had a lot of changes in giving. We had a lot of mega gifts. We had an increased use of giving vehicles like donor advised funds. And we saw a lot of crowdfunding type giving, person to person. So as you see this pie chart, it kind of shows you just where those dollars went. But what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit more as we look at this next piece of really just the foundations and individuals. I talked about really paying attention to the S&P 500 and the stock market. That is a big driver of individual and foundation giving. Stock market does well. People have more assets to be able to give. I mentioned the S&P 500 was up. We had the big crash in March of 20, and then as it moved up through the rest of the year, we had a nice increase up to 16.3%. I should note year to date this year, the S&P 500, I'm not factoring in whatever it's doing today, but is up around 20%. Foundation giving reached an all-time high for giving. And a lot of those foundations were really driving dollars, to helping with the pandemic, rescue needs, helping basic needs, but also the racial and social justice of movements that we saw. Then let's look a little bit at corporate giving, the one piece that was down last year. Some folks look at it and say, gosh, corporations many of them seem to do okay. But there are key economic factors that had an impact. GDP declined 2.3%, for instance. Pre-tax profits declined. That's a big driver in what's happening within corporate giving. And the impact across businesses was very uneven. All of those sort of stay-at-home, work from home group, software and technology, they did really well. But the leisure, travel, transportation, entertainment area, they were really impacted. quite a bit and saw losses. So that's a big part of the reason that we saw that corporate giving down last year. So let's talk a little bit of how much money was given. Let's talk about, just to let you all know where it went. And this is important depending on the sector that you might be in. The big piece of the pie is still religion, but it is sort of getting to be a smaller piece of the pie. If you go back to like the early 1980s, religion was 50% of this pie. Primarily what we've seen is a decrease in attendance and participation, especially in mainline religions. So that's sort of pulled numbers down. Education is the next biggest piece of the pie. Just not long ago, a decade or two ago, some of these we didn't even have in environment and animals and international affairs. So we've added a couple of new pieces of the pie. And let's look though at each of these areas and kind of show the chart on how they did last year. And so as you look at this chart here, what you saw is that giving grew by more than 8% for 5 of the subsectors. We had a couple that were down. The ones that we had a nice increase in, public society benefit. Public society benefit includes what would be the national donor advised funds, not the community foundation ones or single issue ones, but like Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab. A lot of money was flowing into those, also was flowing out. So that's a reason you saw a big increase. But that's public society benefit is also where like United Ways and United Jewish Federations, they are included, and they were pushing out a lot of money into human and basic service needs. We of course saw an increase in human services, as we typically do during a crisis. People react and want to be able to support human services. The environment, we saw a nice increase. There was lots of concerns about climate issues and climate change and policy issues there. And the two that we saw down, health and arts and culture. Arts and culture, probably not surprising because many of those arts and culture organizations had to shut down. It was a little bit more challenging for them raising dollars. The reason health was down, and some people were like, wait, we're in the midst of a pandemic. Shouldn't that have been going up? Well, keep in mind a lot of the vaccine research that was done, that might have been done in an academic medical center. So that would have been counted under education. And also all of the peer-to-peer special events that happens within health, those did not happen last year because we were not gathering. So those were the two sectors that were down. But by and large, we saw a very nice really increase in most of the sectors that we had. So what I'm going to do is stop there. I just wanted to give everybody a really sort of short overview of the Giving Institute, Giving USA Foundation. I'll turn it over to Nicole, and Nicole is going to dig in a little bit more on the benchmarks and what you all can be doing to use all of this information. Nicole, welcome.
Great. Thanks so much, Keith. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Adair with Salesforce.org. And prior to coming to Salesforce, I was a fundraiser and marketer in a variety of nonprofit organizations. And I always found the Giving USA data to be a key tool for me to understand the landscape of philanthropy and my work at my organization. So thrilled to talk about how you might be able to use some of this data. We'll take a deeper dive into the dashboard itself to look at the data, but let me talk about why benchmarks are important to pay attention to. And we'll cover 3 areas: macroeconomic trends, comparing your organization to others in your sector, and then how you might be able to predict the future. So for macroeconomic trends, it's important to understand these and how they can impact the philanthropic sector. So Keith was just talking about the impact of the S&P and the GDP on different types of giving, which to me is an incredible eye-opener for looking at that. This outside-in approach of understanding your organization lets you step out of your day-to-day and connect to the bigger landscape of philanthropy. So you can see what kind of trends are showing up in the data, You can go back, 1 year, 40 years, and get a really good sense of the factors that impact philanthropy and then your organization as a result of that. So as we go through, especially these extraordinary years that we're living right now, it will be so interesting to look back on some of the trends as we even get further out from this. So important to start with the big picture. But then if you want to dive into your organization and your subsector, you can start to compare your organization. If we go to the next one, to other areas of the sector. So when you look at the where you fit in those subsector categories, you can get a sense of how your growth or not is comparing to your peers. And you can also look at the different sources of revenue. So when you look at sources like individuals, corporations, foundations, what is happening sort of nationally in those areas? And how does your organization compare to that? And what does it tell you? So for example, if corporate fundraising went down overall as it did last year for the first time in a while, but your corporate fundraising did not go down, what might you be able to attribute that to? Is there anything you can glean from that comparison? And as you look at those sources and look at sort of the percentage of how they come in, how does that compare? Do you need to diversify your revenue to come in from different sources to help you create a more sustainable fundraising model for the future? So if we go to the next one, you've probably all heard this, and if anybody can tell me who to attribute it to, I would be happy to update this. But when I looked for attribution, I found it attributed to like 5 to 10 different people. So lots of people love this apparently because, and it is so true. So the greatest predictor of future behavior is past behavior. This is such a good reminder for us as we look at this data. We can see a ton of history and get useful information by looking at the past behavior of our donors, but hopefully we can then apply that to what might happen in the future. So we might be able to predict the future, kind of. On the next one, it's definitely complicated. This is not a perfect process, but we can think about what we learned from the past. Has your organization followed these historical trends that you're seeing in the data, and why or why not? As Keith was just talking about the different subsectors that have grown or not, or some who've weathered the ups and downs of the economy over time, what can we learn from those subsectors and learn from each other about best practices for weathering some of these trends? And how can you start to leverage your organization's strengths and mitigate your weaknesses so that can impact your future fundraising performance? So using that history to kind of say, okay, where are we and where can we go in the future? And sort of mitigate some of those circumstances that might impact your fundraising sources. So next, in a moment, I'm gonna jump and show you a demonstration of the dashboard itself that we're offering here between Giving USA and Tableau. But I wanna give you a quick overview of Tableau for those who may not be familiar with it before we jump into that. So broadly, it's an analytics platform that can pull data from multiple sources or systems, and it gives you the power to dig deep and spot patterns in your data. So my colleague Sean is going to dive deeper into that in just a moment and show you how you might be able to use this with your own data. But let's take a look at the Giving USA data visualized in Tableau, and I'll reference back to some of the things I just covered. So let me share my screen. Great. Okay. So as you can see here, this is the dashboard in Tableau. This is on the public Tableau site. And there's 3 sections of this that I'm going to review really quickly. So this is the 2020 Giving Overview. And you can see here, let me highlight that for you. You can select the year that you want to display. So right now I am, for members, if you're logged in, you'll see that longer history of data going back 40 years. I only have 5 right here. But what you'll see first is just the percentage of revenue that's coming from, oh, it's refreshing, great. That's coming from those different sources we were talking about. So this is where you can look and see how your revenue source or your revenue mix might compare. And then again, the different types of recipient organizations here on the right. So you can see what percentage of revenue is coming in overall. And this gives you just a really broad picture of kind of what's happening in the sector, what happened in the last year, or for whatever year you select at the top. Then if you scroll down to the middle section, this is where you can compare one year to another. So it defaults to be 2020 versus 2019, but you do have these selection pick lists where you can pick what years you want to compare. And again, we've got the sources of revenue here on the left-hand side, so that you can see comparison year over year to see growth or changes there. And then the recipient organizations on the right. And as you look at this, if you hover over any one of these bars, it will show you that this kind of gray outlined section is the comparison year. The gold bar is the year that you've selected here. And then obviously the change is reflected at the end of each bar there. So this starts to give you a little bit of a deeper dive into things that might be specific for your organization. So that's a year over year comparison. And then at the very bottom of this dashboard, you'll get a giving recipients by current, this is current US dollars, but again, you can adjust that, but this is more of a trend. So if you wanted to look at, let me scroll up just a little bit so you can see the full dashboard here. You can look at this chart by the different recipient organizations. You can also change this to be the source. So if you were interested in trending for corporate dollars or individual dollars over time, you can certainly see that here. And then it also gives you a metric. So this gray line that you see across is a reference metric. And you have the option to pick different reference metrics that might be important to your organization to evaluate that against. So this gives you a lot more opportunity to kind of slice and dice this in different ways and see trends over time, which can even tell you even more about what might be going on in the sector for your organization overall. And for those of you who do have Tableau, you can download this data. If you look in the upper right, if you're on that site, you can download this data set and kind of dive into it more specifically. So for example, if you're in human services and want to really look at those trends over time, you have that data set available to you to do that. So that is a very high level. I encourage all of you to get in there and play with this and see what you can glean from some of the data that applies to your organization. It's just a really good way to sort of benchmark yourself and figure out what that might be able to tell you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sean. Let me stop sharing, who is going to give you a lot more information about Tableau and how it might be able to inform you more about your specific organization data.
Thanks, Nicole. I appreciate the overview and diving into how Tableau is helping with this giving data. At a high level, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. My name is Sean Pfaff. I am a leader for our solution engineering team here at Tableau, focused exclusively on our education and nonprofit customers. All we do every day is work with customers in the United States that are nonprofits or education. I want to spend a bit more time expanding on what Nicole talked about. So we got a great overview of how data can be incorporated into a visualization through the dashboards that are being made available to subscribers. Nicole also showed a slide on how Tableau and Salesforce customers can leverage the power of data that they're generating in their Salesforce environment and use these dashboard starters to find out more about their program efficiency and donor efficiency. I want to spend about 5 minutes to run through a demo of what you can do with your own data. Let's say you've done everything you can with Giving USA data. Doubt you have yet, but you've done everything you can there. You're getting what you need to out of your environment in Salesforce, but you have your own data that you want to do something with in Tableau. We're going to show how that works. But before we dive into that, I did want to mention Tableau is part of Salesforce. We've been part of Salesforce for about 2 years now. And by joining forces, Tableau and Tableau users get the advantage of using all of the great predictive features that Einstein has made available through Salesforce. So Tableau has been really, really great since 2003 in helping people see and understand data and really get some insights out of the data that may not have been visible through their normal platforms. Now with Einstein, we can do even more. We can help with predictions, with prescriptions, so that you can look at that past behavior to get some indications on what future behavior might be without having to figure it out on your own. Let things like artificial intelligence and machine learning help with that effort. That's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about for the next 5 minutes. But looking at this next slide, you get a sense of where Tableau has done good. And we're simply a partner. I can't claim that we've helped organizations do this, that, or the other. We've certainly provided the means for them to do that, but this gives you a better idea on what you could do to make the world a little bit better by taking advantage of the data that you have available in your organizations. But let's run through a real simple use case of something you may be dealing with in this environment. And Mariah, if you could let me screen share here. Thank you. So in this scenario, I'm looking at my Tableau environment, and I've been tasked with finding out how effective certain programs are that we're providing out to the public. I know that I have data available to me, but I want to just start from scratch and start asking and answering questions in more of a dialogue here. So first thing I want to do, obviously, is just create a new workbook, start my analysis. I want to look at my program management data and see what it tells me. So the first thing I'm going to do when I'm connecting to new data is just kind of survey what sort of fields of data might be available to me. I've been tasked with figuring out how these programs are performing over time, and I see that I have service date information in here, and then I also have things like service hours. So if we build something in this visualization, we can get a sense of what's been happening. Service hours have been going up over time. This isn't granular enough for me. I'll use Tableau to just start drilling into all of the different levels of detail I can get out of the data. Service date, as we know, month, day, year. Tableau is smart enough to know that, well, there's a month, there's a day, there's a quarter as part of it. So I can immediately get visibility into what's happening at a month-by-month level. I can see peaks and valleys and service hours that have been delivered. And then also take a look at those by program. So if I want to get a better sense of where we're spending the bulk of our time, I can do that. I didn't like the way that Tableau picked colors here for me, so I'll just go ahead and change the colors around a little bit so that they are a little bit more visually appealing to me. And this gives me at a high level an idea to ask and answer questions about what our peaks and valleys are with respect to service hours. So we have our service hours over time. I also notice in here that we have things related to a service name. Maybe I want to get a sense of what those service hours are for all of our programs over all time. This is great. I do, though, see that I have another level of granularity I can go into for service name. What does that give me? Okay, so I can do this drill down then directly in my visualization to get a breakdown for employment training by the different services. And this allows me to see that referrals are much higher from an hours perspective than things like case management. I think this is also going to give me another point in my conversation with data. And then the last bit that I'm looking at is I see that I have geographic data, postal code, countries, cities. Let's see what happens if we look at it by postal code. Well, just clicking postal code, all I know here is that there's something in my data for every one of these zip codes that is being mapped here. But That in and of itself isn't enough. Let's look at our program information. So now I can see in every zip code what's happening for certain types of programs. That's great. But if I really want this to pop, I want to see how we're delivering services by area and by type. So we'll take our service hours, add that on to our size, and now we see these circles. I can see circles that represent where we're spending the most of our service times by location. Tweak a little bit of the formatting here so that we can see some of our smaller values maybe pop up. So the idea here outside of Seattle, we have a lot of employment training in this zip code, but we also have small levels of employment training in these other zip codes. Just so for clarity, let's take our city information, and that's so we can confirm that it is indeed Seattle. Maybe it's Redmond. We look down in Salem. So you get the idea here. So now I have a visualization that's showing me my map over time, but I want this all to work together. I want to empower users to go in and ask and answer questions about specific programs that they're working with or specific locations. To do that, we'll build a dashboard. So if we look at the program hours over time that we had before, maybe our program hours breakdown by service name, and then our map, we now have created a pretty simple yet powerful dashboard, clean up things here a little bit, that allows me to kind of see these services over time by program hours, by maps. But I don't want to have to go in and try and figure out, well, what happened at this dot? Because maybe I'm interested by it, and then have to go into program hours and drill. Let's use the power of visualization to do that for me. So I simply created a filter on this top time series to say when I click on a point or a year or a month, all of my other views will change to give me that visibility that I care about. And we'll keep going forward with that. We might as well make every one of these be the context that we could use for asking and answering questions. So I may have a question come to me where someone says, well, Sean, what have we been doing in Florida? And as I highlight Florida, we can see that we've had a big uptick in 2018 for employment training, but it's kind of dropped over time. Well, okay, that's great. But if I want to see what cities in Florida have done residential programming, as I click on residential programming, now I see where our service hours are, as well as those cities in Florida that are doing quite a bit with residential programming. We can even take it further, look at academic grants, not a lot, all the way down to group session. So with your own data, you can get insights into what's going on in your organization as it relates to giving history and how that giving history may determine where you're applying funds for services and what those impacts of services may be over time. So that was meant to give you a very fast, high-level overview of what you could do with data to get your own insights and start acting on those insights. I'm going to turn it back to the team here and let Emily lead us off in some Q&A. Emily?
All right, thank you so much, Sean and Nicole and Keith. It's just so fascinating to me to watch you go through that. So I know I thoroughly enjoy seeing all that Tableau can offer. So we wanted to take this opportunity to answer any questions that you all might have. So I know several have come in, and if there are any more questions, as the old saying goes, there's no such thing as a stupid question. So feel free to enter those in the question and answer box, and I'll start diving right into some of these. First, I have a couple questions for Keith regarding specific Giving USA data. The first is, how much of giving would have been up if not for the high dollar giving?
So as we look at it from sort of the mega bequest that we have out there, we don't necessarily look at it and see what that percentage was, but as you think about it, you had just alone Mackenzie Scott, whose giving was about $6 billion. So as you start to look at that on 470 some billion, that's a big chunk right there. That's over 1%. We had some of those other gifts that were there. We still would have seen an increase. It probably would not have been quite at the level that it would have been. And one of the other things we like to always remind people is that, a significant amount of money, in philanthropy is coming from pretty small portion of people as we look at it. So those larger donors are typically in any year driving giving. We just don't have it broken down as how much of a percentage. They would definitely change those numbers.
Okay. And then another question in regards to the data, is it possible to look at the data by state or region to better understand local area trends?
No, and what we end up doing, this is really more of a macro study. So we're looking at it just across the board, and where those breakdowns are happening is in those, those 4 sources. And then when you really look at the subsectors of the uses, so we can't break it down. There are some, there's some states that have done their own surveys and reports that Lilly School has done, but those are not done on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. Sean, just a quick question on Tableau. Is this free or is it a fee-based platform?
I'm going to give an answer everybody hates. It depends. So what we're talking about for this initiative and for our call today, that aspect of it is free. So the dashboard that's being published and that Nicole shared, that's made available on the Tableau Public platform. Think of Tableau Public as YouTube for data visualizations. It's just a place to be able to put up content, share your findings, let others look at it. Like YouTube, there's some really fantastic and insightful visualizations up there. And there's some others that aren't as insightful or impactful, but they still tell a story. So yes, that part of it will be free. The demo that I gave, where I went in and connected to my own data and built my visualization out, that is a fee-based platform that we're happy to talk more about for your specific use case. It could be as simple as one user or your entire organization. Really depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay, thank you. And there were a couple technical questions as far as Tableau goes. I'm not really quite sure what they mean, so I'm not sure if this is the best platform to answer it or if you need to maybe reach out to the person with some more technical questions. But the first one is, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong part of my screen. Here it is. Okay. For the Tableau data source, does it have to be Salesforce or can it come from Dynamics 365 or an SQL server?
Yeah, at a high level, the answer is no. Salesforce is obviously a primary connector for us, but we also connect to upwards of 200 other different data sources, SQL Server and Dynamics being 2 of them. So yeah, you're not limited. And that's the whole idea of bringing your own data in that might not live in Salesforce. Tableau can probably connect to it.
Okay, perfect. Nicole, question for you. If someone is just getting started looking at their organization's data, how do they know how to get started? I guess what recommendations would you give to them? And then how do they know what data and how much data is most important?
Gotcha. So I think a great place to start is to look at benchmarks like the ones we shared here or in other forums for what's being measured sort of across different organizations. And then how does that apply to your specific organization's goals? For fundraising, a very easy place to start is to think about recruitment, retention, and growth. So where are you getting new donors from, and what does that kind of metric look like for you, and what does it look like in the past? How are you growing the current giving of donors that you have already acquired, and what do those trends look like? And then how are you retaining existing donors? So looking at that churn of like how many new donors are coming in, how many are falling off of your donor database, and then that will tell you a lot about what you can do to mitigate some of that. I think you don't have to start with a ton of data to start to see trends. I think it's like you can always make it really complicated. So start simple. Think about those, 3 to 5 metrics that you think are really important for your fundraising practice, and just start with those. And sometimes the very practice of measuring the data will help you define processes that will enable you to do better, right? So they say what gets measured gets done. So just the practice of kind of defining those and starting to measure them and look at benchmarks will really improve your process.
Great, thank you. As I'm working through these, I have another question for Keith. Not sure if we break this down or not, but regarding religious donations, how does the data vary based on faith?
We don't have it broken down by faith. But what I should note is that religious giving is really focused on houses of worship, dioceses, for instance. It's not, as we look at, for instance, if you were say an Operation Blessing, for instance, or a Catholic Charities or a Catholic school or something like that, those are falling within the subsector that they belong in. So like a school would fall under schools, others might fall under human services. So it's that religion sector where we don't break it down by faith. It is really focused more on houses of worship.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not sure if this one should go to Keith or Nicole, or maybe Sean, but can the giving yeah, can do a virtual arm wrestle. Can the Giving USA Tableau data be filtered by NTEE codes?
I don't think it can. So NTEE codes are usually, if I remember correctly, the sort of industry or subsector, right, of each organization. Yes. I don't know if that's in the back end of that data. Do you, Keith?
No, I don't believe it is. So essentially what you would need to be doing is looking at it, but Tableau will look at the individual sector. Correct, Sean, on that. So what you would need to know is, for instance, if you know your NTE code and your environment and animals, or your arts, or wherever it may be, then you would be able to go in and look at those subsectors that you would end up having. But it's not, as many of you all know who really get wonky about NTE codes, they have a lot of subcategories in there. And so we're not having all of those subcategories. But you can compare it to your sector.
Okay. Sean, this one I believe is for you. For those who are Giving USA beginners, what are some good ways to get better acquainted with the software?
Yeah, yep. So I would say start at tableau.com. There is a section on the website called Learning, which has a number of quick starts, videos that will give you an idea on how to run through the platform, where you can follow along. Tableau also makes trials available free of charge, 14-day trials, so that you can download the software full amount and use it. And then there are more structured learning programs available where you can say, okay, I have the basics, but I want to do more in a structured way. We have learning paths that will guide you on what sort of learning you should follow, and will set you up for success depending on your role, depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay, great, thank you. I believe that is all the questions we have at this point. So if we missed yours, go ahead and enter it in the Q&A. But at this point, we'll move on to the next slide. So I know a lot of people have been asking both about the recording as well as how to access the full data visualization. So wanted to make you all aware that the recording will be sent out to everyone in the coming days, to all of those who registered, and then it will also be available on givingusa.org. So it is a public facing page that anyone who wants to view the recording is welcome to. Additionally, on that page, there is a link to the limited data visualization that we went over today. And then there's also a full data visualization that goes back 40 years. I think the latest is 1975. So if you want access to that full data visualization, that is available to our Giving USA subscribers. And if you'd like to become a Giving USA subscriber and access that, you can go to givingusa.org. There are also a lot of other perks to being a Giving USA subscriber, such as getting access to our annual report, our special reports. For instance, we have a donor advised funds special report coming up in November. So it's a great way to get access to a lot of really cool philanthropic data. So with that, I want to say a huge thank you to Keith, Nicole, and Sean for being with us today. Thank you for sharing your expertise. It's been really, really valuable. Also, thank you so much to our partners at Salesforce who made this product possible and this webinar today possible. We're just really thankful to partner and collaborate with you all. And finally, thank you to everyone who joined us today. Feel free to reach out at any point for more information on how we can continue to support your fundraising efforts, both from the Giving USA side as well as through Salesforce and Tableau. And we'll go ahead and close. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.